Please be seated. Check. Am I on? There we go. Happy Sabbath, everybody. It is great to be here worshiping with you today. We have been on a sermon series journey on women in the Bible. And we have looked at some amazing women that are featured in scriptures, and we're going to continue with that today. Last year, there was a boy who was 6 years old, so that means he's 7 years old now. But last year he was 6, and his little sister was 4. And they had gone over to the neighbor's house to play with some of their kids. And their neighbors had a dog. And this dog was acting a little bit aggressive, and it looked like it was going to come over and get his 4-year-old sister. Well, any older brother knows what his job is when he's got younger siblings, right? You protect those younger siblings, especially if it's a younger sister. But even if it's a younger brother, too, I think older brothers, they believe that they're the only ones who can beat on their younger brothers. Nobody else can. It's just them. But this young boy saw his sister in danger and went and jumped in between his sister and the dog. And the dog came up and bit his face, requiring a lot of stitches. But it was enough time for the owners to come and grab the dog and to save his sister. And the story went viral all over the internet of 6-year-old Bridger saving his 4-year-old sister. So much even that it gathered the attention of actor Chris Evans, who plays Captain America, and he sent him his own Captain America shield for the 6-year-old boy. There's a candy store in Denver that gave him a $400 gift certificate to the candy store. That's every 6-year-old boy's dream, isn't it? He said he bought Jawbreakers. And what are those sweet and sour gummies? What are those called? Sour Patch Kids. He got a whole bunch of Sour Patch Kids. His parents, his dad said, it didn't surprise us at all. He has always been very protective of his little sister. It seems natural for an older sibling to look out for a younger sibling. And that is the scenario in the story where we begin in the Bible today. Turn in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2, the second book in the Bible. And we are going to look at an older sibling who was very protective of her little brother. And this older sibling, her name is Miriam. Exodus chapter 2. It says, a man of the house of Levi went out and took a wife of the daughters of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. Now, why would a mother hide her child for 3 months? You see, it was a dangerous time to be a baby when Moses was born. In fact, it's a dangerous time to be a baby today. And his mother had to hide him for 3 months because if she hadn't hid Moses, Moses likely would have been killed. But it came a point in time when she could no longer hide him, the Bible says, and she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, and put the child in it and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. That had to be the hardest thing that mother ever did. Do you know what river this is? The Nile River. Do you know what lives in the Nile River? Crocodiles. That seems like the least safe place, but tucked away in the reeds, it must have been a safe place where the crocodiles didn't go. And in order to save her boy, she wrapped him up in this, made a whole little boat for him that he couldn't get out of, and she tucked him in there because she didn't feel safe keeping him at home anymore. She thought he would be found. Verse 4 says, and his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. This is Moses' older sister. She is standing out at a little bit of a distance, watching to see what's going to happen to her little brother. They can't hide him forever. And she's a sharp young lady. Verse 5, it says, Then Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to go get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. Have you ever heard a baby cry quietly? Maybe when they're wrapping up the crying and they're all tired and, they have that breathing, like, you know that cry I'm talking about? They can't, they're just wrapping up the crying session. But man, when they're going, here's another thing. This is an experience of a father. You know it's going to be loud when you hear this. And they get their breath and they go, but they got their mouth open and they're building up to it, right? And little baby Moses, they open the top of it. And baby Moses is in there crying. He doesn't want to be in there anymore. And older sister Miriam's probably just watching. This is the most action that's happened. What's going to happen to her little brother? And the baby wept. And so she had compassion on him and said, This is one of the Hebrew children. Somehow she knew. Verse 7 says, Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, she walked right up to Pharaoh's daughter. This is the daughter of a slave, walking up to the daughter of the king. She walked right up and said, Shall I go call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? I love, this is a sharp young lady. She has a solution ready. She's confident. She walks right up to Pharaoh's daughter and says, Hey, I would like to help you out. I'd be happy to find someone to take care of this baby for you until you're ready. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. So the maiden went and called her mom. She went straight to her mom. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, saying, Because I drew him out of the water. This is where we see Miriam for the first time. Big sister Miriam, looking out for little brother Moses. A sharp young lady, maybe 12, 14 years old, something like that. Looking out for her little brother, confident enough to go and talk to Pharaoh's daughter, sharp enough to have a good plan to convince Pharaoh's daughter. This is Miriam. And Miriam was in the business of saving her baby brother. God is in the business of saving babies. Did you know that? God is in the business of saving babies. It's Satan that's in the business of killing babies. This should make matters today concerning babies very clear when we open up our Bibles. God is in the business of saving babies. Micah chapter 6, verse 4, it says, God calls Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to deliver the Hebrews. Did you know that God called all three of them to deliver the Hebrews? Most of the time, very prominent in this story is, of course, Moses. Playing a supportive role is Aaron, the high priest, Moses' brother. But oftentimes, we don't think of Miriam as one of the three leaders of Israel in the Exodus. But the Bible says in Micah chapter 6, verse 4, that God called Miriam as a leader as well to help free his people. How did the Israelites feel about Miriam? There's a book called The Daughters of God, and on page 33, the author says this, In the affections of the people and the honor of heaven, she stood second only to Moses and Aaron. The people loved Miriam. God had a special place of honor in heaven for Miriam. Miriam loved God. In fact, we see, the story about the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, right? God opened up the sea. They were being chased by the Egyptians. God saves them in a way that none of them even imagined. They're safe on the other side. No more Egyptians are chasing them. And Miriam helps lead them in a praise service. She helps lead all of Israel in a praise service. Miriam was a singer. She was a praise and worship leader. And the Bible says that she sang and she danced in celebration of their salvation that God had wrought for them. Now, I have a lot of young people who've asked me this question. Well, Pastor Jamey, look, Miriam danced. Look at that. Pastor Jamey, it's in the Bible. Miriam was dancing. The topic of dancing is an interesting one. I had a good friend of mine one time. Some of you may know him, Daniel Santa Cruz. We were missionaries in Pohnpei, Micronesia, way on the other side of the world together, and we had this discussion on dancing. And he said this to me. He said, I've never forgotten it. He said, dancing is a vertical expression of a horizontal desire. I never forgot that because it got to the point. It got right to the point of dancing. If you're married and you're dancing in the kitchen with your spouse, more power to you. If you're not married to him, keep your dancing like Miriam's. Miriam loved God. She was devoted to God. God spoke through Miriam. Miriam was a prophetess. He chose her to be a leader. She pointed people to God, led them to a closer walk with Him. She saw firsthand the deliverance of God. And as a prophetess, there were messages that just came to Miriam for God's people, that He shared them just with her. She was working with her brothers and her brother's wife. Now, I don't know if you've ever worked with family before, but that can be difficult. I think I've told you before that my brother was my boss for a lot of my younger life when we worked in the family business. And it is not fun having your brother as your boss. Not fun at all. When family works together, there can be some tense times. And it was no different for the family of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Miriam, of course, is the older sister. 12 years maybe older than her brothers-ish. That's significant, right? If you've ever had an older sibling that's that much older, or a child who's that much older than one of your younger siblings, you know they tend to try to parent them a little bit, right? And how much does the younger sibling appreciate that extra parenting? Not a lot, right? There's usually wailing and gnashing of teeth, complaining, hey, you're not my mom, you're not my dad. I wonder how much of that went on with Miriam and Moses and Aaron. Well, it was tough for their family. It was tough because there were some squabbles. And you might think, man, they had squabbles in the Bible? Everybody in the Bible was perfect. Turn in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12. And let's look at this family specifically. It's a very, very complex family. Numbers chapter 12. And this is just after Moses has selected the 70 elders with the help of God. And we come in chapter 12 to a little bit of a family dispute. Now, many of us have probably had family disputes, people we've disagreed with in our family or had squabbles with. So this is familiar territory. Verse 1 of chapter 12, it says, Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. Let's just stop right there. Both of them started talking against Moses, their brother. He's the leader. There is discord among the leadership and the leadership's family. They are starting to talk badly about Moses. Question his leadership. Question what he does. Now, what happens to any leadership when there's quarrels like that and dissension in the ranks? Things start to fall apart, right? Aaron and Miriam start talking against Moses. And we see a little bit why. One of the reasons is because Moses selected the 70 elders without their input. Moses had much better input, by the way, for that decision. God helped him with that. But there was a little bit of feeling left out, I think, of the decision-making process. Why weren't we consulted? But chapter 12 gives us even more insight as to why they were murmuring and speaking out against Moses. It says, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married a lady from Ethiopia. Okay, whoa. This just got a whole lot more complicated. Because the sister-in-law does not like the sister-in-law. The big sister who's always kind of looked out for and protected Moses is not a big fan of Moses' wife. And the Bible tells us why they're not big fans. She's not Jewish. Now, bloodline-wise, probably, there's some in there. She's a Midianite. Midianites were descendants of Abraham. However, it also says she was a Cushite or an Ethiopian woman. Anybody ever met anybody from Ethiopia? They don't look like a Jew, do they? It's different. It's a different culture. And they do not get along. Now, if you lead together a whole nation, you kind of need to get along as a family, don't you? But we see some of the weaknesses here in the leadership because the family is starting to squabble. Now, it says because she's an Ethiopian. And some people might say, well, does that mean Miriam was racist? Because this is a very interesting marriage that we have here between Moses and Zipporah, isn't it? It's not traditional Jewish marriage. Was Miriam a racist? I don't think so. Racism is kind of a tough thing to define. Here's what I think. You're probably thinking right now, ooh, wow, the pastor's going to tackle racism in church today. Here's what I think. I'm not a huge believer in the idea of racism. I do think that people are uncomfortable around other people's cultures. I think that traditions of other groups of people make us or whoever uncomfortable. And maybe we don't like those traditions. Here's a couple of examples. I was talking with David Asherick the other day. I was helping him with one of his DA with DA filmings. And he mentioned something about Australians. And it was fairly critical of Australians. And it was this. It was something that he does not miss about Australia. Customer service. He said, the customer service in Australia is horrible. When you walk into their store, the attitude that you get is like, aren't you so lucky to be in my store? I'll be with you whenever I'm ready. Whereas for Americans, we're used to prompt customer service, right? The customer is always, you know the drill. It's different in Australia. It's a different culture. And it wasn't that David was saying he disliked Australians. He disliked what they did as a culture, as far as their customer service went. If you've ever traveled to Asia and ridden a train, you will know that the idea of personal space and your bubble does not exist. If an American got that far inside of my personal space here in America, there's going to be problems. But in Asia, there's no personal space. There's somebody right here, and there's somebody right here, and there's somebody right here, and there's someone right behind you an inch away. And everybody's just used to it. There's no personal space. Here, we have our bubble. We like our bubble. We don't want anybody inside of our bubble either, unless we're married to them. Then it's okay. But if it's a stranger or someone we don't know inside of our bubble, for an American, there's a problem. You see, it's a cultural thing. It's not that Americans don't like folks from Asia. It's that the Asians do things a little bit differently. Now, if you're an American and you've traveled overseas somewhere, you've probably heard some criticisms about Americans as well. And some of you chickens have been like, we're Canadian. we're not American. Chickens. Americans have a little bit of a reputation overseas as being loud, we're a little loud. Not all cultures are like that. I think probably Zipporah did things a little differently than what Miriam was used to. Zipporah grew up, this is how my house is supposed to be, in a different culture. Miriam saw that as wrong because that's not how she was raised. And she struggled with that. This is her brother. She struggled with Zipporah's culture. And clearly it rubbed her the wrong way. We've all had a culture or something that's rubbed us wrong maybe when we've traveled. Miriam was the same way. Maybe you've ridden a train in Asia. You've had your personal space taken away. You know the discomfort it is when your culture is not someone else's culture. And Miriam feels this as well. Now, Miriam's story is a very, very intense story in this chapter. Turn back with me to Numbers chapter 12. They aren't getting along with the Ethiopian wife of Moses. So they said this, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? We don't really need Moses, is what they're saying. God will talk to us too. We don't care for how Moses is doing this. God will work with us too. We don't need Moses anymore. And they start talking back and forth about this. And then the end of verse 2, it says, and the Lord heard it. God was listening to their conversation. God heard everything that they were talking about Moses. Now, Moses, we get a description of Moses in here in verse 3 that is probably one of the most complimentary verses of anyone in the Bible. An amazing description of Moses. Verse 3, it says, now the man Moses was very humble, more than all the men who were on the face of the earth. That's saying a lot. Moses was the most humble man that was alive on the planet at the time. I like being around humble people. Not so much the bragging type. You've probably been around someone who's just tooting their own horn all day long. And after a while, you're like, I gotta go. But a humble person, when you're around a humble person, they're one of the most kind, enjoyable people. They're always lifting other people up. This is who Moses was. More humble than anyone on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out here, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting. So the three came out. I wonder what the looks on their faces were like. Well, we all three got summoned. You got the message? I got the message too. You got the message? Oh boy, all three of us are coming. All three of them get summoned by God. Verse 5 says, then the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both went forward. So Moses stays farther back. He doesn't get called. Aaron and Miriam are called forward to stand apart from Moses. And then God says this to them. Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Now, this was probably fairly familiar for Miriam. She's known as a prophetess, right? God is saying, look, Miriam, this is how I talk to you. I'll tell you something in a dream or in a vision, something along those lines. Verse 7, it says, not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly and not in dark sayings. And he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? This is an intense conversation. Moses is standing a little farther back, brother and sister up close. God is saying, why weren't you afraid to talk like this about Moses? Moses, who I have made a leader. Moses, who I talked to face to face. Why weren't you afraid? Why weren't you a little nervous about attacking him verbally as my chosen leader? An uncomfortable silence probably right after that. And you know, there in the last 5 or 6 years have been a lot of things said about some church leaders in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination when people disagree with them. Some very, very nasty things have been said about church leaders. And whether we agree with them or not, this story pops into my mind. To be respectful and careful with how I talk about the leaders that God has chosen, specifically in the headquarters of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It says, the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned towards Miriam, and there she was, a leper. So Aaron said to Moses, "O my Lord, please don't lay this sin on us, in which we have done so foolishly, and in which we have sinned. Please don't let her be as one dead, whose flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb." All this happens so quickly. All of a sudden, Miriam has leprosy, and the three of them are standing there looking at Miriam. Leprosy is a death sentence. You're not going to make it out on the other side without a miracle from leprosy. Her skin is white. She can tell the difference right away. And who prays for her healing? Who prays for his sister's healing after she's been stabbing him in the back over and over again in his leadership role? It's Moses. Moses pleads with God to heal his sister. He cries out to the Lord, "Please heal her, O God, I pray." And the Lord said to Moses, "She'll have to be sent out of the village for 7 days. Let her be out of the camp, and afterwards she may be received again." And Miriam was shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not journey until Miriam was brought in again. All of Israel is on timeout from their trip for 7 days. That means this is probably not a secret. Everybody wants to know, why aren't we traveling anymore? And the story of Miriam comes out. Why did all of this happen? One quote I've read through says, Miriam found cause of complaint in events that God had especially overruled. The marriage of Moses had been displeasing to her. That he should choose a woman of another nation was an offense to her family and national pride. Zipporah was treated with ill-disguised contempt. She was very open about how she treated her sister-in-law. Later on, it says, in the book Daughters of God, page 33, it says, envy is one of the most satanic traits that can exist in the human heart. It was envy that first caused discord in heaven, and its indulgence has wrought untold evil among men. Miriam was a little envious of her brother's position. She was ready to take over. He's not fit to lead, we are. Let's take this over for him. We can be the leaders just as much as he can. Over and over again, it's written that envy was a problem with Miriam. She's struck with leprosy. Why is this? Why is there a punishment that goes there? What is God trying to say here? There's a book called From Eternity Past that talks a little bit about this. It says, in answer to the prayers of Moses, the leprosy was cleansed. She didn't have leprosy very long. She was healed. Miriam was, however, shut out of the camp for 7 days. The whole company abode in Hazeroth, waiting for her return. The manifestation of the Lord's displeasure was designed to check the growing spirit of discontent and insubordination. Envy is one of the most satanic traits that can exist in the human heart. There was a grumbling in Israel. Discontent. Israel is known for this a lot of times, right? We see this over and over again with Israel. And God just had Israel take a little bit of a time out. And the reason God does these things is because He cares. He does these things to draw people back, to give them a new perspective on things, to remind them of the direction they need to go. And so in God's mercy, He does this to help bring their attitudes back to where they need to be. Kind of like a loving parent, isn't it? The last part here, though, says envy is one of the most satanic traits that can exist in the human heart. Ever been envious? Don't have to raise your hands, but have you ever been envious of somebody else? Of a life that they had or something that they had? It's hard to put those things in check, isn't it? But when you find a way to be content with your life, you will be supremely happy in this life. When you find peace with yourself and aren't always looking at what everybody else has, their position, whatever it is, you will find that you gain the most happiness you can probably have on this earth, being content. Not looking at other people and saying, man, I wish I had their stuff. Look at what they've got. Boy, wish I had that. Envy, the author says, is one of the most satanic traits. That's strong words, friends. Those are strong words. Envy is a satanic trait. And it says the most satanic trait. Because when we're envious, that's all we can think about, right? Everything we do has to do with that. And that becomes the focus in our life of what we don't have. I've heard it said that envy is the thief of happiness. And I think that's true. Contentment is the formula for happiness. No matter where you find yourself in life, find happiness there. Look for what is good and what good that you can do. I've lived all over the world in all kinds of different places. I've slept where there's rats, cockroaches, all kinds of geckos running on the walls. And I've slept in some really nice places too. And I've always tried to remind myself, Jamey, find the best wherever you're at. Find a way to be content with whatever you have, wherever you're at. And make the best of it, no matter where you're at. And that has helped me to be content and happy. I'm just as happy eating a $1 street meal in Thailand as I am a $100 meal on the top of a high-rise hotel somewhere. It's just food. Find happiness wherever you are. Contentedness, I think, keeps us from having our heart wander away from Jesus. If Jesus is what we are constantly searching for and wanting in our lives, we will have that contentedness. If there is something else that we are chasing, we will never, ever be content. Perspective and looking around and learning to be happy with where we are is so valuable. There was a man who lived with his wife and 6 children in a very small one-room house. They were always getting in each other's way. There was so little space. They were always running into each other. They could hardly breathe. Finally, the man could stand it no more. He was talking with his wife and asked what they should do. And she said, "Why don't you go see the rabbi?" They were a Jewish family. "Why don't you go see the rabbi and see what he says?" And after they argued a little bit longer, he went. The rabbi greeted him and said, "I see something is troubling you. Whatever it is, you can tell me." So the poor man told the rabbi how miserable things were at home, with his wife, his 6 children, all eating, living, and sleeping in one room. The poor man told the rabbi, "We're even starting to yell and fight with each other. Life couldn't be any worse," he told his rabbi. The rabbi thought deeply for a moment, and he said, "Okay, do exactly as I tell you to do, and everything will get better. Do you promise to do what I tell you to do?" And the guy said, "I promise." The rabbi looked at him and said, "Do you own any animals?" And the guy said, "Well, yeah, I have a cow, I have a goat, and I have some chickens." The rabbi said, "Good. When you get home, take all of the animals and move them into your house with you to live with your family." The poor man was astonished to hear this advice. But he'd already promised to do whatever the rabbi told him to do. So he went home, got his cow, his goat, and his chickens, and he brought them into the house. The next day, the poor man ran back to the rabbi, and he said, "What have you done to me? It's terrible. I did everything that you told me to do, and the animals are all over the house. Help me. What do I do?" The rabbi listened calmly. He says, "Okay, I want you to do this. I want you to go home. I want you to take the chickens out. Take the chickens out of your house. Go for it." So the guy goes home, takes the chickens out. The next day he comes back to the rabbi. "Rabbi, it's insane in my house. The goat is driving us all nuts. It's knocking everything over. It's eating all of our food. Help me." So the rabbi says, all right. He says, "Why don't you go home, take the goat, and let the goat live outside now?" He says, "Okay." He went home, got the goat out of there. The next day he comes back. He says, "Rabbi, I feel like I'm living in a barn. This cow is just driving all of us nuts. It's terrible living in here. I can't live with this cow anymore. What should I do?" The rabbi says, Okay. Why don't you go home and let the cow out of the house?" He says, "Okay." So he goes home, lets the cow out of the house. The next day, he comes back to the rabbi, all smiles. He says, "Rabbi, thank you so much. Our life is amazing. We have so much room in our house now. Everyone is so happy now that all the animals are out. We're all getting along just fine. It's like a new chapter is turned in our lives. We love it." It was all just a little bit of perspective. It wasn't that they had a new home. It was just they needed to learn to appreciate the home they were in and what they had. You see, when we kick envy out of our lives, when we learn to be content, we have way more time for Jesus in our lives. We're not focused, even sometimes obsessed, with other things or positions. When we are focused on Jesus, all that stuff seems to not matter much anymore. With Miriam, she really struggled with her brother in leadership and her sister-in-law. And she was envious of his position. She thought that she and Aaron could do a way better job. And it was because of that envy that it really started to eat her alive on the inside and make her just a miserable person, so much to the point where God had to say, "Miriam, we need to talk." I hope in my own life, there's never a point in my life where God says, whoa, Jamey, time out, we need to talk. What are you doing? I hope that never has to happen. It didn't happen there for Moses, did it? In fact, God brags about Moses a little bit. Moses is the most humble guy on the face of the earth. and she struggled with that envy piece. Friends, I think if we can learn to be content, I believe that God has every one of us right where He wants us. And He can use us the best right where we're at. Positions don't mean anything. God was clear with that with Miriam. Look, Miriam, I've used you. Don't act like I haven't used you in amazing ways. You're a prophetess. There have been times when I've come to you first. Why are you looking at Moses like this? Miriam, I can use you the best here. I think God has every one of us right where He wants us in life. And if we are content and focused on Jesus, Jesus will turn our hearts into the humble hearts of Moses. And through doing that and making us humble, I think He can use us in much bigger ways. It's easy sometimes for us to get caught up in ourselves, isn't it? To be looking inward. Kind of like Miriam was a little bit. But I think God wants us to be focused on others. There's a song we're going to close with. I'm going to invite a worship team to come up. The song is called Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. And I think Moses did that very well. And Miriam learned to do that very well. But friends, we will have a contentedness in our life, a peace in our hearts when we have our focus on Jesus, and that peace in our hearts will give us the most joy in life that we could ever have. Beyond anything anybody else has that we might look at and say, I'd like to have that, whether it's position or whatever it is. The peace that Jesus gives us in our lives is worth 100 million times that. And may our focus always be on Jesus. Let's stand together as we sing. Turn your eyes upon Jesus.